Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Hi. How are you? My name is Charlotte Dev, and I'm from Carson Dunlop, and I'm joined today by Scott Thompson, one of our inspectors, and Dave Slack, who is an insurance professional. So Dave works very closely with the Carson Dunlop family. He does a lot for our clients, and he's going to talk to you today about hard to insure homes, insurance issues, and how he can help your clients if they have issues with their insurance. Okay? So go ahead, Dave.
Good morning, everybody. As Charlotte said, my name is David Slack, and I'm of David Slack Insurance Brokers. A little bit about myself. I've been in the business about 30 years now. I've worked for these various companies over the years. Started with Liberty Mutual Insurance back in the late 80s. TD Insurance bought Liberty Insurance early in 2004, and then after that I decided to go on my own. Formed a brokerage with a partner, and then went on my own about 5 years ago. So I've been in the business a long time. Corporate strategy. Every business has to decide where they want to get their clients from or what type of business they want to pursue. Like realtors, you have to decide an area that you want to work in, whether it's to be a listing agent or a selling agent or sell condos or high value homes. In my particular business, we've decided a number of years ago to work with realtors, providing solutions to their own insurance needs and for their clients. The insurance industry over the last number of years has moved to a call center approach for selling insurance. I'm not sure who you guys are insured with personally, but most insurance today is sold through call centers like TD Malash Monix, Baylor Direct, RBC, Desjardins. If you're buying a newer home or you're looking for car insurance, the process works pretty well. You call a call center, you talk to somebody that's pretty junior, and as long as there's no hiccups with the house or the cars, it goes pretty smoothly. It doesn't work very well with older homes, however. The call center staff at these insurance call centers are typically very young and very inexperienced. The turnover rate is extremely high. Most people that work in these call centers have never owned a home, and their knowledge of older homes is very limited. Most of them have only been in the business a short period of time and are just learning the basics. So when you get into the older homes and some of the older systems that they run into, they really are lacking experience. And if you're referring your clients, or if your clients are involved and they're calling a call center to get a quote, especially on an older home, if your client can't answer all of the questions when they call in to get a quote, the process stops. Like if they're asking about the type of wiring or the type of heating or plumbing, age of the roof, if your client can't answer that question, the agent at the call center can't get off that screen. So they basically say, call your realtor, call your home inspector, and come back to me with that information so that I can continue with the quote. That's not a great situation when you're dealing in your industry when you've got time constraints. If you're doing an offer and if it's a conditional offer, you need an answer very quickly. It can be very frustrating if you're trying to get a quote or a confirmation of insurance in a short period of time. My particular brokerage, we understand the issues with older homes and just home insurance in general. And we understand the nature of the real estate transaction. I'm actually married to a realtor, works out of Burlington. We understand that realtors don't work tips, so many of the realtors I deal with have my cell phone or my email address in their phone. If they ever have a question or concern, or they're doing an offer or looking at a house where they're going to do an offer and they have a question, I'm available anytime, 7 days a week. Monday to Friday, Monday to Sunday, anytime during the day. If you have a question, send me an email, give me a phone call, or send me a text, and I will be happy to respond to that question. My relationship with Carson Dunlop goes back to the late 90s. I actually insured a couple of the home inspectors on a personal level, and at that time, they were looking for ways to add value to their home inspection business. Carson Dunlop's always been known as the eminent home inspection company in Southwestern Ontario. And their competition, it's a very competitive industry, and their competition, if they're not able to compete on the quality of the inspection, what they do is they compete on price. So no matter what Carson Dunlop charges for a home inspection, their competitors, to try to get market share or get business, will come in and cut their home inspection fee. So back in the late 90s, a couple of the gentlemen that worked at Carson Dunlop approached me and said, we think there's some value in the home inspection that we do, and an insurance company would really greatly benefit from the knowledge that we have in our inspection. the age of the house, the type of wiring, the type of plumbing, all that information that we need in advance. So I went to my insurance company and I said, I think it's a great opportunity. These guys do a top-notch inspection, discount to their clients if they've had an inspection through Carson Dunlop. And after a couple of years of sort of arm twisting, I was able to convince the insurance company to go ahead with this. So we now have two of the largest insurance companies in Canada that we represent with Carson Dunlop that will offer a discount to your clients if they've had a Carson Dunlop home inspection. The discount can range from 12 to 20% depending on the product, whether it's home or auto insurance. And it's an actual discount. It's to the two largest insurance companies in Canada, and it's a very meaningful discount. I have people that get the home inspection just so they can get the discount on the insurance. One of the things that came out of the relationship back many years ago, back in the late 90s, when insurance companies started to get really strict on underwriting property insurance, especially on the older homes. And one of the things that came up was the wiring with these older homes. Do you guys have any trouble with insurance for your clients when you're dealing with wiring? Do you run into knob and tube wiring at all, or aluminum wiring, or 60 amp service, or anything like that? Yeah. The older homes, I'm not sure the older homes in the Markham area, but when you're running into an older home, the chances that it's going to have knob and tube wiring are very high, or it could have galvanized plumbing, or an old heating system, or an old roof. One of the concessions that we made with the insurance companies is when it comes to older homes, part of the selling feature was many insurance companies have gone away from insuring older homes. Some of them just, frankly, a house built prior to 1920, they just won't offer insurance. I think it goes back to the complexities when you're calling into a call center and trying to get the correct information and be able to get a quote out to the client in a timely fashion. But when I approached the insurance company about doing the insurance for older homes and offering the discounts, the selling feature was the older homes tend to be in the nicer area, like the older homes tend to be in the nicest part of the city, whether it's in Toronto or Burlington or Oakville or Markham or Richmond Hill. They tend to be the most expensive homes in the area. The buyers of these homes tend to have a higher education than average and higher income levels. So from an insurance standpoint, from an insurance company standpoint, that's the kind of customer you're looking for. The homes tend to be better built. They're solid brick construction. They have hardwood flooring. Modern homes today are more built in a quick fashion. They're typically particle board, brick veneer, aluminum siding. So the older home, in many respects, is a better home from an insurance standpoint. So some of the electrical concerns we run into, knob and tube wiring. If you run into a home with knob and tube wiring and it's been inspected by Carson Dunlop, it falls into three different categories. The first category is if the house is all knob and tube wiring and it's going to be an owner-occupied home, we can insure the house for your client at a standard rate, and we'll give them up to 1 year to update the wiring. Okay, and if the house has had somewhat of an update, half to a third, there's a new panel, there's some new wiring in the house, but there's still a significant amount of knob and tube wiring. If they're not planning on removing the knob and tube wiring, we'll ask that they obtain an ESA certificate within 120 days. That's an electrical safety authority for anybody that's not familiar with that. They basically come in and do a very detailed audit of the electrical system and make sure that everything's safe and sound. And if there's anything that needs corrected, we'll ask your clients to have it corrected in a timely fashion. If the house has been significantly updated, a lot of times the knob and tube wiring isn't all removed. Sometimes they'll leave it in the lights or porch lights or bedroom outlets. If the inspector at Carson Dunlop looks at the wiring and it's deemed to be in good condition, there's nothing further your client has to do. We'll insure the house at a standard rate and there's no follow-up that's required. Aluminum wiring might be more common in this area. Houses built in the late 60s up to the late 70s, a lot of them have aluminum wiring. We would ask that, again, we can insure the house for your client at closing a standard rate. We would just ask that they obtain an ESA certificate within 120 days just to confirm that the aluminum wiring is okay. Or if they know an electrician and they want to have an electrical audit performed by an electrician, that's fine as well. 60 amp service we run into once in a while, not too often anymore, but some of the smaller houses in the area still have a 60 amp service. Again, we can arrange the insurance for your client. We would just ask that they upgrade the service to a 100 amp breaker panel sometime within the first year. If there's a reason that they don't want to do that, if the house has got a gas stove or a gas dryer and it's not something that needs to be done, we can look at that on a case-by-case basis with the insurance company. It's not a big expense, so most people don't have a problem upgrading to 100 amp service. Plumbing's a big issue with home insurance these days. Most of the claims we see are somehow related to water, whether it's a sewer backup or a sump pump failure, or galvanized water lines leaking, or hot water tank failing, or dishwasher hose failing. If there is still some galvanized water lines that are in use, we're going to ask that they replace within 6 months. Again, we can insure the house for your client at closing, get the insurance in place at a standard rate. They just ask that they update the plumbing within 6 months. The waste pipes tend to be the last thing that gets replaced. A lot of them are still the cast iron waste pipes. By what the inspector says, if the waste pipes are still in good condition, we're not going to ask your client to remove it just for the sake of removing it. If it's if it's showing signs that it's splitting or leaking, we're going to ask them to update at that point. But we really rely on the expertise of the Carson Dunlop inspector on that one. Kitech plumbing, you might find that more in this area. Kitech plumbing is a new insurance dilemma. It's a form of PEX plumbing. The plastic hosing type plumbing that they're going to on more modern construction. Kitech plumbing, there's a problem. There's a class action lawsuit that originated in the southern United States back, I think, in 2011. And the plumbing, that type of plumbing has been discontinued. I believe it was in 2005, but it might be a little bit later than that, depending on supplies of different plumbing companies. Kitech plumbing, if it's there and it's been inspected by the Carson Dunlop inspector and it's in good condition, again, we can insure the house at a standard rate with no need for your client to update. This is a topic that a lot of insurance companies aren't really aware of. If you call around, depending on who you talk to, a lot of them aren't even familiar with what Kitech plumbing is. Will decline insurance if there is Kitech plumbing, and they will ask you to replace it. The biggest thing I can tell you to give advice to your clients when they're calling to get a quote from anybody is don't give up too much information. Like when you're calling for a quote, let the insurance company ask you the questions. Don't say, oh, by the way, I want to let you know that my house has this. Let them ask you the questions. If they think it's important, they're going to ask you. If you place and you word a question in such a way as, oh, I just want to be upfront with you, my house has Kitech plumbing, or I just want to make you aware that my house has vermiculite insulation, or I've got a or urea formaldehyde insulation. All of these things, or many of these things, aren't insurance issues. But when you call the call center and you're talking to somebody young, and you phrase a question and it sounds like you're concerned about it, it's a problem. So I get answers. I get people call me all the time say, I can't get insurance because my house has this issue. And I said, well, how did that come up in the conversation? Because I said, I don't think they would even ask you that question. They said, oh, I just want to be upfront, let you know that my house has vermiculite insulation. Don't ever give up information. Just call in. They're going to ask you the questions that they find important. If they don't ask you, then you're not obliged to tell them, because they're going to ask you everything that they're concerned about. So Kitech plumbing is one of those topics that when you ask around, most people aren't even aware of what it is. And there's been a few cases more in the east, but I talked to the Carson Dunlop guys, the inspectors, of all the hundreds or thousands of homes they've looked at that had Kitech plumbing. I think they've only come across one that showed any signs of possibly being in a situation where it may fail. So we don't know if the problem with the plumbing is unique to, like, the class action lawsuit originated in Arizona or Las Vegas. We don't know if it was unique to the climate in those areas or if it was unique to the water. They have very hard water in southern states. We don't know if it's the type of water that's in their system, because we just haven't seen the problems in the GTA. So we're not asking people to remove plumbing just for the sake of removing it. Hot water tanks, insurance companies are asking about the age of hot water tanks because they do tend to fail as they get older, and when they fail, they cause a lot of damage. So if the tank's over 15 years old, we're going to ask that you replace it or rent their tanks. So it's not an expense to the client unless they have to change some of the they're changing the draft on them when the vent piping on some of the older tanks have to be changed. So there is a bit of cost, but most people rent their tanks, so it's not a big expense. But to change it when they're old. The insurance companies actually give discounts for people that have changed their tanks and they have newer tanks, or if they've gone to a tankless hot water heating system, there are fairly substantial discounts on the home insurance just because of the chances of a failure on a tankless system are pretty minimal. When it comes to the roof, again, we look at the Carson Dunlop inspection and we sort of go by what the inspector's comments suggest. If most typical roofs will last 15 to 25 years, depending on the shingles that are used. You know, Toronto houses or houses in this area, a lot of times people will replace sections of the roof. They won't replace the entire roof. So if the roof is shot, we're going to ask you to replace it. But it's just based on the inspection. We're not going to ask just for the sake of it, just for the sake of replacing it. If it's 15 years old and it still looks in good condition, we're not going to ask you to replace it. Flat roofs as well. Flat roofs are more prone to leaking. So again, we rely on the inspector's report. And if he's recommending that there's some work that needs to be done, we're going to ask that your client take care of that. Heating systems, if you're running into furnaces that are over 25 years old, the insurance companies are going to ask you to update that. Not mandatory. If the furnace is over 25 years old and it's working well, if you sign up for a heating contract with many of the gas companies, that's just as good as replacing it. We're not going to ask you to replace it if it's working and you've got it signed up for a heating contract. Same with boilers. Boilers tend to last longer than furnaces. They should be serviced annually. And as long as you're maintaining it and it's still working properly, they're not going to ask you to replace it just for the sake of replacing it. The reason the concern with the furnaces and the boilers, when they do fail, they tend to fail in the coldest. If the house is without heat in January or February, there's obviously prone to pipes freezing, which can be a problem. We had that in Toronto back in the storm of 2014, when a lot of parts of the city had no power for 3 or 4 days. I never had a burst pipe claim in my career, and I think I had 6 in one day that January because of the cold. People had no heat, so it can be a problem, especially more prone to the older houses because the insulation in the walls isn't as good. Oil tanks. Whenever you run across an oil tank, when you're doing a listing or when you're working with a buyer on a new house, take close note of it because insurance companies are really cracking down on oil tanks. If an oil tank fails, it can be a catastrophic loss to the insurance company. They're hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on what happens. If the tanks, outside tanks are rare in this area, but you see them more north. If the tank's outside, obviously they have to be, they don't last as long, so they can last up to 15 years. But when you're looking at an oil tank, take a look at the tag. If the tank is a 12 gauge, if it's a 14 gauge or 2 millimeter tank, insurance companies, unless it's double walled, which it probably isn't, because that's something that's happened relatively recently, insurance companies won't even insure the house if it's got a single wall tank and it's a 14 gauge tank. So make sure you're aware of that, because when your client goes to get insurance, if they've already signed off on the house, this could cause a great problem. The ideal thickness is the 12 gauge, 2.5 millimeter thick tank. If it's inside the house, they're good up to 25 years. If it's outside, they're good up to 15 years. And if it's an outside tank and it's buried, run. Nobody wants to insure a buried oil tank outside. The environmental problems are just, there's just too many unknowns with the tank leaking into the soil. Row houses, I'm not sure this particular area, but in Toronto, row houses can be difficult getting insurance for, especially the older row houses. Insurance companies want to make sure there's a firewall in between the units. So row houses built like back in the early 1900s, this wasn't always the case. I do have insurance companies that will insure them, but the catch is with an older row house, it must be completely updated. So if you've got a case where it's got a bit of knob and tube wiring or a bit of galvanized plumbing, the insurance company that I have that will insure the row house that doesn't have a firewall won't accept it with knob and tube wiring, or will on a small basis, but it's a little bit stricter. So when you're running across old row houses particularly, again, keep in mind the insurability of the property. Make sure that your client is aware that it may be a little bit more difficult to get insurance. Insurance companies preferably like rows of less than 4 or less in the row. So if you've got a row of 8 or 10, again, they're more strict, because what happens is if there's no firewall in between the units, and one of the units catches on fire, the fire goes up into the attic and it spreads right across all the units that are in the row. So you might have a perfectly good client in your unit, but you might have people 2 or 3 down that aren't so responsible, and it can damage the whole row of properties. Other issues that come up with home insurance, again, I'm not sure so much about this particular area, but I mentioned vermiculite insulation. It's a type of insulation that was used many years ago that may contain asbestos. It's not an insurance issue, but I've heard people say they can't get insurance because it has vermiculite. So again, tell your clients not to, if you do find out there's vermiculite, just don't bring it up. It's not an insurance question that anybody's going to ask you. Insul brick, same thing. I've had people call me and say, Dave, I'm having trouble getting insurance because my house has got some insul brick on the exterior walls. Again, it's not an insurance issue, so nobody's going to ask you if the house has insul brick. The same with urea formaldehyde. I think it's still on the offer. You have to notate it, but it's certainly it's not an insurance issue. But again, if you make it one, it can become one for your clients. So just keep heed when you're talking to an insurance company about what you disclose. Any questions, anybody?
Oh, really? Wow. Okay, so we're going to get started. My name is Charlotte Dove, and I am the Director of Operations and Client Care at Carson Dunlop. And joining me today is Scott Thompson, who is our head condo specialist. So today we're going to look at why inspecting condos is a little bit different than inspecting a regular property or home. And we'll take a look at some real life examples so you can see the differences yourself. So you'll be able to identify them when you're out showing properties to your clients or listing a property. Okay, so there are 2 different types of condo inspections that you would normally expect to find. One would be the single unit. So if you were representing a buyer or a seller where they're just selling that individual unit. The second type of inspection that we would come across would be a common elements inspection. That's usually done by the building for the status certificate. So a technical audit or reserve fund studies just for the building itself to budget for any upgrades that need to be done. If you're representing residential clients, you're most likely looking at the first one for single unit buyers. And if you'd like, I can send you a copy of this presentation so you don't have to take notes or anything after the fact, so you can reference it. Okay. So I've worked for Carson Dunlop for about 7 years, and in those years, I've seen a vast difference in the amount of clients that are actually looking for condo inspections. So it used to be that agents specifically would say, I don't need a condo inspection. It's very limited. What are you going to look at? It's not going to take very long, and my client does not want to pay $500 for a condo inspection, the same as they would pay for a house. Over the last few years, our condo business has actually increased exponentially because we're seeing more of a demand from clients who are looking to get these types of inspections, especially when you have the prices of real estate at what they are right now. So it's not for everybody. We know that. So if your client has lived in 6 condos, they're very comfortable with the living, they know the units well, most likely they're not going to want a condo inspection. But we do see the value for some clients. And the types of clients that we're seeing the value for would be first-time buyers. So people that are transitioning from maybe living with their parents to living by themselves for the first time. If they're buying a condo, they're wanting to get that extra education. They're not familiar with living in a condo versus living in a house. So this process really helps to educate them on what they can expect. The next one would be empty nesters, or people that are downsizing. So people that have actually lived in homes their whole life and have decided to their children have moved out, they're wanting to get a smaller space that they don't have to live the same way and have to worry about the maintenance. So empty nesters, people that are downsizing, we're seeing that they want to learn about the differences between owning a house and owning a condo. So we definitely see interest there. The next one would be investors. So if you're representing someone that's overseas, someone that's looking to buy a property for possibly renting it out, tenants, we're seeing overseas clients that want to get a report that tells them exactly what the property looks like because they're not actually going to be seeing the property. So this adds value if you're going to be listing a property or helping a client buy a property. Sometimes this helps for you to get that deal done because the client feels more secure and happy that they know exactly what's going on with that unit. The next one would be buyers. So just people that maybe have experience, but they just want to get that extra layer of security, knowing that they've had a professional come through and take a look. And so they're aware of any issues that may be in the unit. And then the last one would be condo buyers. So people that are buying those penthouse units, the large condos, this is definitely something that luxury condo buyers, because they're spending that extra money on the units, they're wanting to get an extra insurance policy basically by having an inspector take a once over. Okay, so why would you inspect condos? The first thing is that you really want to know and understand your product when you're walking a client through. And there are definitely going to be different systems when you look at a condo versus a home. So if you're used to representing home sales or lists or buys, it's definitely going to be different for you to walk through a condo and understand that the systems are going to be a little bit different. And you want to be able to explain that to your clients. The next one is to reduce your liability. I think Scott can tell us how many times he's gone into a property and the listing says that it's forced air gas, and it's not, in fact, forced air gas. So from that standpoint, that puts you at a liability if your listing is incorrectly represented. Buyers could come back later on and say, you misrepresented the property. So it's really important for you to understand the systems that are in the unit. Identify issues. Years ago, people said, you know, condos don't have a lot of issues. They're brand new. We don't have to worry about it. But we can definitely tell you from experience, we see a lot of issues within condos, especially condos that are constantly being sold and bought, people that have had tenants. There's a lot of issues that come up that people don't really know that they need to identify. Okay, so who inspects condos? So for our company, we decided that we needed to create a specialized team to look at these units because they're not the same as houses. So at Carson Dunlop, we do have 16 inspectors on staff. Only 5 of those inspectors are specially trained to do condo inspections. So they are specially trained, they have a special template that they use, they are all able to work together when they find something that they've never seen before. So we're able to research things and make sure that we give our clients all the information that they need. And we do have a specific condo protocol that we created within our company. You will find other home inspectors that will tell you, I'll take a look at the condo, that's not a problem. But what I would ask you to consider asking them is, what's their protocol for those condos and what training have they gone through in order to look at those units? Because if you're just a regular home inspector and you don't do a lot of condos, you're not going to know intimately the differences between the 2 different types of properties. Okay, so now we're going to get into the differences, and I think I'm going to have Scott take over as we talk about the differences between condos versus houses. The first thing we'll look at is the HVAC systems and why they're a little bit different. Scott, do you want to take over?
But in most cases, the heating and cooling system is very unique, and every unit is a little bit different. So depending on whether it's a 2-pipe fan coil unit or a heat pump, the utility usage can be completely different. It can cost the unit owner different amounts of money to replace and maintain. So it's good to identify those different types of systems.
Good point. You want to be able to explain to your clients what they can expect from the maintenance fees, right? Because they want to really understand if they're moving in, is it going to be a 4-pipe system that's going to cost them more, or a fan coil? They want to understand it, so you need to be able to identify and explain it, or have an inspector that you can call to come through and explain it for you.
This is an example of a two-pipe fan coil unit system, one of the simplest, most common types. It's basically just a box in the wall with a fan and a coil. So the building provides a heated or cooled fluid. It's a central system, and that's pumped to a radiator that puts the heat or cool into the air. So it's very simple, but it's good to understand that that's how it works. The utility is more focused on the building rather than the unit. And there's more complicated versions of these systems as well. And higher-end condos will have a four-pipe system. I think that's the next slide.
Yeah. So for the two-pipe,
yeah,
what they're looking at is they're just going to have heat or cold, right?
Right. So that's the building where they give you the notice twice a year and they switch it from heating to cooling. So the building has more control over the utility, but it is a simpler system. Then if you get a higher-end condo during the shoulder seasons where you may require heating or cooling, they'll have a two-pipe system and they'll actually provide heat or cool, and you can switch it back and forth. So it's a nicer system, a little bit more expensive to run. I don't see this very often, but it's good to know that you have that. It's a feature, and looking at the wall, the box on the wall is not going to tell you that. So it's good to take that apart and understand how it works. Yeah. So just there's one other type of heating system that's pretty common, the heat pump system. We don't have an illustration of it, but it's basically an air conditioner that runs forwards and backwards. And again, from the outside, it looks pretty much the same as a fan coil unit, but the utility usage is a bit different. It uses electricity to provide heating and cooling. So it's good to know how that system, or know that that system's there, understand that the electricity usage is going to probably be a little bit higher, but on the flip side, they'll have control. They can heat or cool any day of the year, all right? Yeah, so this is a typical thing for condo units. You'd want to know this. Typically, the building provides the hot water to the unit. Sometimes you'll have a water tank in the unit, but that's not very common, so it's good to know that. Okay, yeah. This is one of the most common things that we talk about as far as electrical goes. Biggest difference between a house and a condo would be the main disconnect. So in a house, when you go to the electric panel, there's going to be a single breaker that shuts all the power off in the house, and usually pretty easy to find that, right? In a condo, they have that in a central location. So telling a downsizer or someone buying their first condo unit for their children that this is different and helping them understand that can make them feel a lot more comfortable within the condo unit. So as far as safety goes, you know what to say. And then this is just an example of a typical condo panel. So normally you'd have your main disconnect up top, but in this case, it's in that central location. So like, for example, in this building, it's probably somewhere in the hallway in a locked closet. So it's just good to know those differences. Oh yeah, condos have problems just like any other building, so it's good to identify these things. Water is the enemy. Rather than having buildings lined up down the street, now we've got units vertically. So if we have a water leak up here, we're going to have problems below. It's all about maintaining and controlling the moisture. Understanding the different type of HVAC system, identifying potential insurance concerns, high tech, we'll talk more about that. Yeah, these are the things that commonly come up in a condo inspection. Who owns the HVAC system? So does the unit owner own the system? Does the building own the system? Who services it? Where is that in its lifespan? Other main systems in the unit, who owns these things? Who's taking care of them? We want to make sure that somebody is being responsible for these systems that break down. Yeah, it's all the same stuff. Okay, moisture. Moisture is the enemy. It doesn't matter which building you're in. You always have to stay in control of the moisture. And honestly, the newer the building, the more so it's important. It's a higher efficiency building. It holds the moisture better. It also is, it's just part of the system. So even in brand new buildings, as young as 6 months old, we can see moisture damage if they're not being taken care of properly. And that's using your fans and monitoring moisture levels. So when you shower, you make sure that your client understands they need to use the fans when they cook and they clean and all these things. Otherwise, condensation can build up in the windows that can lead to damage to the exterior walls. So this is part of the conversation we have with the clients, make them feel comfortable, get them prepared, and get these good habits going. You got to get used to living in this space and feel comfortable in this space. I've seen incredible water and mold damage in buildings that are basically brand new because people are just not using the fans. Simple as that.
It's also something that you can look for if you're showing a property or list. Especially, I would say that you should be conscious of it if the property has been rented, because oftentimes tenants don't pay as much attention to caring for the unit. So there's definitely going to be signs, like there's things like if you're starting to see mold in the shower, that can be an indicator that they're not running the fans while they're having a shower. In and around windows, if you're seeing condensation, it's very important to remember that condos are very airtight, right? When you have an older home, you have air traveling through that home because there's cracks, which is good because that allows the building to breathe and gets air in and out. When you have a condo, because they're sealed and they're airtight, if you're not finding a way to distribute that hot air out, then the moisture is actually staying in the unit, and that can start to cause problems. And when there's moisture, there's mold. And that's a big concern for a lot of people these days. Oh, that's exactly what I just said.
Use your fans. Very, very important. Simple thing. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, so opening windows, cleaning out lint filters. Does everybody know about lint filters in condos? Do you know the secondary lint filter, where it is?
Does anybody live in a condo? You live in a condo? Do you have a washer and dryer in your condo unit? Is there a little clean out in the ceiling? Yes. Do you know why that's there? Okay.
Most people don't.
Right.
It's not just you.
In a regular house, you just have the dryer and it fluffs the air out the side of the house, right? That's how it works. There's a filter in the dryer that keeps the appliance clean and prevents lint from building up inside and causing fires. In a condo, especially if we're up high, we can't just naturally let the air fluff out the side of the building because it might be windy outside. The wind pressures can vary. So we actually take the air from the dryer with a fan in the duct, we suck it from the dryer and push it outside under pressure. So to protect the fan in the duct, there's a second filter, and it's usually in the ceiling up above the dryer. So when you're walking through a condo with a client, check the ceiling and look to see if there's a little box with a knob on it. Pull it down, check the filter. Often people living in condos just don't know it's there, so they don't clean it. And then they wonder why the dryer takes 3 times as long to dry, because it's actually getting clogged up and air is just not moving through the duct. So it's a little thing. Again, just getting to know the condo and understanding how it works. This is just one of those condo things.
Okay, so now we're going to look at some examples of disgusting things we found during condo inspections. So this is a good one. Scott, can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Okay, so this is the inside of one of those simple 2-pipe fan coil units, the box with the coil and the fan. This is the bottom of the coil and the condensate collection tray. It's obviously older. It's been wet for a long, long time, and things are starting to grow, and it's just near the end of its life. On the outside of this, it was just a simple metal grill. You couldn't see any of this. It didn't show any issues, visible issues on the outside. You had to take the cover off to see this. Obviously, air is passing by this and going into the unit. So you're breathing this material. It's good to know what you're breathing. And they had to replace this unit. Yeah, this is obviously older. And again, the inside of another, and this is the inside of another heating system, and they've had water damage coming down through and everything's rusting out. That's an electric motor. It can't get wet. Right. It's not good. It's hard to see the picture. So this is one of those space units. So it's on the wall of an exterior, it's on the base of an exterior wall, like a heating and cooling system in a hotel room. You know, the little box on the side of the wall. Yeah, so this is a condensate issue. So without taking the cover off and examining it, you couldn't actually see this is all water buildup. It's overflowing. The water doesn't have anywhere to go. So this one's really old and again needs to be replaced. It was just a simple lack of servicing. They weren't cleaning the filter. They weren't having the drain cleaned. Any of these systems, they all have a certain level of maintenance that needs to be done. It's often not done.
It's also really important to note that when we do condo inspections, we find that it shifts a little bit. So when you go through, I'm sure you guys have all gone through a home inspection, the inspector is really there to look at defects, right? So they're looking for things that are wrong with the property. And although that's part of the condo process, we find that a big part of the condo inspection is educating the clients on what they can do, because this is a different type of unit. So things like, this is how you maintain this. This is what you need to do to fix it. Those are really valuable pieces of information. And we find that it's essential, and clients really appreciate learning how to take care of something, because it's not the same as a home.
It's very true. Right. Simple things, even just like changing the air filter, knowing where it is, knowing how often to change it. Those are like to point out to the buyers. So you can see here's what a really dirty air filter looks like. And just like in a furnace, it's really important that you keep that clean. Otherwise, it puts back pressure on the system. Air can't circulate. It doesn't work very well, and that can actually reduce the usable lifespan of the heating system. So furnace, any of these types of heating, cheap filters replace often. That's the rule of thumb, okay?
Can anyone see what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah. So it's always the changes that people make to condos. So in this case, there's actually an electric panel hidden in behind here, and these shelves are covered in things. So if you ever had an electrical emergency, in this condo in particular, you'd have to stop, take everything off the shelves, remove the shelves, pull out this insert, and then you'd have access to the electric panel. So that's not really ideal in an emergency situation. Of course, in this case, it's not the condo that was deficient, it was the change that the unit owner made to the unit. So they added a cupboard here where they shouldn't have. Right? It's good to know that. All right, here's another example of changes that have been made. So there's actually an electric panel hidden in behind here. So if there was an emergency and you needed direct access to this, it'd be very difficult to get past the washer and dryer. So it's good to highlight these things. In this case, they actually relocated the panel to the other side of the wall. It's a fairly straightforward repair, but without that, if there was an emergency, you could put yourself in a tight situation. Older systems. This is just an example of an older fuse panel. There's common in older buildings, but got a lot of overfusing here and double taps. So this is a system that would be updated to accommodate a more convenient, breaker system. I'm sure you guys have seen breaker and fuse panels before. You see these in a lot of like 70s and 80s buildings. Can you see that? You guys, it's two copper pipes coming out of the wall. Have you ever seen in an older condo unit underneath the sinks maybe pipes like this? No? Anyways, there's different types of water shutoffs in condo units. Some look like a regular valve, some look like these little pipes in the wall, and you actually need a key to control these. When it comes to moisture, you want to make sure you can control it, especially if there's an emergency like a leak. So you want to be able to identify where your main water shutoffs are in a condo. Usually there's two, hot and cold, because they're providing hot and cold water from a central location. So if we see these, we inform the client of what they're for and how to use them if there's an emergency, aka find the key and make sure you have one. Okay. Sometimes they'll be underneath the bathroom vanity. That's an example of a very, very dirty lint filter cleanout. That's in the ceiling above your laundry machine. So they haven't been cleaning that out.
You can imagine how well the dryer was working with all of that in there, right? Yeah. It's pretty gross.
Yum.
This is another example of that. So people just don't know that they're supposed to clean those out, and that's something that's really important for their quality of living, and also to make sure the lifespan of the appliances is as long as you want it to be.
Wet walls. Okay, so this is a moisture meter we use to detect moisture levels. Moisture levels can range from 0 to 100%, a puddle or completely dry. Healthy levels are typically between 5 and 15% moisture. When you get over 20% moisture, there's a potential for mold and mildew growth. Anybody read what that number says? It's around 93%. It's very, very wet. You can imagine what the inside of that wall looks like. It's probably not very pleasant, moldy, maybe a little bit of rot. Moisture is not being managed in this area, right? This was water coming through the exterior wall. There was a bit of problem on both the condo side and the unit owner side, so they had to resolve that together.
Okay, so this is Kitec. Does everybody know what Kitec piping is? Are you guys familiar with that? I know that there's quite a lot of houses in the Markham area that have it. So I'll just give you a little bit of a crash course about what Kitec is. Kitec is a type of supply piping. It's that plastic piping that you see that goes from the hot and the cold water in the basement all the way to the bathrooms and the kitchens and everything else. So the problem with Kitec piping is that there's a class action lawsuit that Dave talked a little bit about. So the issue is that the issue initially arose in Las Vegas, Nevada. And the problem was that the fittings, which are these things right here, were starting to corrode. So there was kind of like a white substance that was developing on them. And then what would happen is that white substance would cause the water to catch and basically burst the pipes. This was a huge issue in Las Vegas, Nevada. If you're familiar with that area, you know that they have very hard water there. They've also found issues in places like Windsor, again, somewhere that's commonly got hard water. This is something that is common. It was sold between 1995 and 2007, but we have seen houses as late as 2011 that have this product in them because although they stopped making the product, plumbers that had purchased it didn't stop using it until they ran out of it. So if you're showing a condo or a regular home, that's something that you may want to take notice of because it is a hot button issue for a lot of people. So the issue with Kitech right now is that, like I said, there is a class action lawsuit. If the house has Kitech in it, what the lawsuit says is that your clients should register for the lawsuit if they own that property. So they can put their names onto the lawsuit by going to their website, and I can send that to you guys. But what the lawsuit says is do not tear out the Kitech altogether unless there's an issue. So what they would advise your clients to do is just monitor the property to make sure that there's no white stuff going on the fittings or any sort of bubbling on the piping itself. I will say from our perspective as Carson Dunlop, we have seen hundreds of houses in the GTA that have this piping in them, and we have seen one issue. And that one issue was in a high-end home that had a water recirculating system. Does everybody know what that is? So you know those systems, they're usually high-end homes where, say it's a 3-story house and they want to be able to have hot water right away. They don't want to run the water and let it warm up. So they have a system in the basement that basically runs the water in a hot loop. So that hot water is running through those pipes 24 hours a day. Now, what do we know about it from science? We know that when you heat something up, a chemical reaction happens faster. So the issue that we found was in a house where the hot water was running through those pipes 24 hours a day. If you're looking at a standard home, the hot water runs through the pipes maximum maybe 2 hours a day. So it's quite a lot of hot water. And in that house, the pipes had actually begun to bubble and they did start to split. So that's the only house, and I would say probably 95% of houses or 99% of houses do not have that type of a system. The issue for you as real estate agents is that Kitech is killing deals. People know about it and they're concerned about it. And so we are seeing people walk away from deals when there's Kitech. So you need to be aware of what the product is. You need to be able to explain it to your clients and understand what the issue is. Specific to condos, what we're seeing is condo owners are being hit with special assessments for replacing Kitech, because what building managers are deciding to do is just rip it out before there's an issue because it's starting to affect property values. So it's important for you to understand and look for it on the status certificate or have the lawyer take a look at it because it will have to be outlined in the status certificate that it is in the property. But that's another thing that if you have a condo inspection, the inspector is going to be looking for so we can let the clients know. Now, from our perspective, we take a look at the piping and we will let your clients know whether or not it's in good shape, but it's your client's prerogative whether or not they're okay living in a property that has it. And they need to be aware that there may be a special assessment at some point. I've heard of multiple condo buildings, Yonge and Eglinton, downtown on the waterfront, a bunch of different buildings where they've just decided to pull it out. There haven't been issues, but they don't want there to be issues. So they've decided rather than keep it in and see what happens, they're just going to rip it out.
Has anybody actually ever had to deal with Kitech or seen it or heard the word before? Is this a new thing? Okay.
You have.
Okay, good. Well, somebody, that's good.
I know for a fact, I had a presentation last week and I had an agent who told me that TD is asking if the house has Kitech, and if it does, they will not insure it. So that's something that you should keep in mind. We do have insurance solutions like Dave Slack who can help in those types of situations. Yes.
Good question.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of, this is one of the issues with Kitech. So in the same way that you have many different brands of facial tissue, right? You have No Frills brand, you have a bunch of different, Kitech is like a brand name of a facial tissue. The type of product is a PEX, so a plastic piping, and they're still using plastic piping in buildings today. It's just specifically the Kitech brand. But the issue is Kitech as a company also made this Kitech piping under many different names. So you have Kitech, you have Plumb Better, you have, I think there's about 10. So what I'll do is when I send you a copy of the presentation, I'll send you a copy of the names that you can look for. And usually those names, so I don't know if you can see it very well, but it acts on this fitting. So that's a way that you could identify it. Oftentimes, Kitech will be written on the piping itself. So what we would advise you do is if you're in a house, look close to the boiler to see if you can see it written. If you're in a condo, you're going to look under the sinks, in the kitchen, in the bathroom to see if you can find that printing. But again, the property manager should be aware of what type of piping was used in the property. And if they're not, that's something that definitely needs to be identified because it is quite a big issue. If it's under the Kitech list, and I think there's 10 of them, then it matters. If it's any other type of plastic piping, then you're fine. There's no class action lawsuit. Now, it's important to put it in perspective for your clients. So you guys know asphalt shingles, right? The things that are on roofs. Do you know that every brand of shingles has a class action lawsuit against it? So it's important. Often there's class action lawsuits for a lot of things in this world. There's class action lawsuits against GM cars. Do we still drive them? Absolutely. So it's about putting it in perspective for your clients and making them feel comfortable. If it's something that they're not okay with, then you need to understand that, but it's also something that you need to be aware is not as big of an issue as they're talking about in the media from our perspective. This is another one of the brand names that the Kitech falls under. So Plum Better, there's a French version. I will send you the document so you can just take a snap of it on your phone, and then I would just have that with you. So if you're in a property and you're not sure, you can check that list of names.
The colors are actually different with the pipes. Just keep this in mind. Just because plastic doesn't, okay? Plastic can be okay.
Okay, so back to the actual condo inspection itself. It's important to understand what's going to happen during a condo inspection. So as a company, we will always encourage your clients to be there if at all possible. If your clients are not able to be there, we can also set up a phone conversation after they have the report, once they've gone over it. So if they have any questions, we can address that with them. And we will provide your client support for the duration of the time that they own that unit. So if they have a question 10 years down the line, we're going to help them to answer it and resolve any issues that they have. We also invite you as the agent to attend. So we have a lot of agents that tell us after the fact that they learned a lot from the condo experience. So we encourage you to attend if at all possible so that you can kind of get that education as well. It's important to note that the inspection is obviously going to be shorter than a single family home because it's a smaller unit. Unless it's a huge unit, obviously it's going to take a little bit more time. But for a standard condo, under 700 square feet or under 1,000 square feet, it's going to be significantly less than a home because we're not looking at the outside. There's no basement, there's no attic. Your client will receive their report the same day that they have the inspection. And like I said, we have free technical consulting for as long as they own the home. And I've provided you a copy of our full house inspection reports on your chairs, but we do have a specialized condo that I can also send out to you a sample so you have an idea of what that looks like. They're going to get ballpark costs for anything that we do say they need to repair or replace, as well as maintenance tips and advice.
Things that cost money do come up in condos. So like an old heat pump system can be a fairly significant cost. It can cost between $4,000 and $6,000. So it's good to identify those potential deficiencies.
Yeah, and when we looked at those pictures, like Scott said, if you just walk into a condo, I'm sure you guys have all been in a condo before, and you see that heating system on the wall, right? It's covered by a grate or metal. Your client, if you're just doing a walkthrough, you're not going to know what's going on behind there. So they're not going to know if that system is in bad shape, I need to budget for $5,000 or $8,000 to replace that. So it really helps you to, if you have to go back and renegotiate the deal, if your client is not comfortable with it, or if your client just needs to know they need to budget for it, it's important for them to know that before they sign on the dotted line. Another unique feature of our condo inspections is a recall check. Do you guys know what a recall check is? So this is a specialized service. It's a third party that we use, and they basically, when we go on site, will record all of the model numbers of the appliances, the major appliances within the property. Then we enter those appliances into our recall check system, and basically what that system does is searches a database to see if there have ever been any recalls on those types of products. So if there is, for example, if there's a dishwasher and there's a hose recall because it leaks, that's going to flag for your client. Generally, those replacements are free of charge to your client. They just call the phone number on the sheet and the manufacturer will have someone repair it at no cost to them. But it's really important, especially when you live in a condo, if your dishwasher leaks, you may be responsible for the damage that's done 3 floors down because of that leak. So it's important for your clients to know if there's any issues within the unit and help them to get them resolved as quickly as possible. And then once they are signed up for that service, they have it for the duration of the time that they own the property. Okay, so the question is, do condos really need inspections? This is what one of our agents told us. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically, this is Graham Rowlands, who is a member of the Tribe Young Professionals Network. And he talked about going on an inspection with Scott Thompson. Yay. So he really had a great experience. He said during the inspection, the differences of how condos are heated. It's amazing how many condos are listed as forced air gas, but are actually a heat pump or a fan coil. So again, that goes back to your listings. If you're putting that it's a forced air system and it's not, that puts you at a liability. So it's important to really understand the systems. Okay, so the condo that they inspected said forced air gas and the heat and AC were included when in fact it was a heat pump which requires electricity to work. So from a client's perspective, that's going to have a bearing on their maintenance fees and how much they're paying for hydro systems. So it's important for them to understand what they're getting into so that they can budget appropriately. So if you're listing a condo for sale, take the extra minute to learn about heating sources before uploading it to MLS because these mistakes could turn out to be quite costly. The other nice thing about the inspection is it's great for a first-time buyer is it can show the buyer how everything in the condo works. Okay, so for condos, they do not start at $500 or $400 like our home inspections. They start at $299 depending on the square footage of the unit. So they would go up from there. But when you look at the pricing of condos, this is a huge investment. We see a lot of clients that come back to us and thank us so much because that $300 investment saved them $5,000 on a heat pump or whatever it may be. So it's important to understand and put it in perspective. It's a little bit of money up front to reduce their costs and understand how to maintain the unit to have it last as long as possible. The other offering that we do have for condo inspections, and this is generally for people that have concerns with moisture, we do see a lot of moisture issues within condos because like we talked about, when you have a condo that's 20 floors up and there's 20 units on top, where does the water go if there's a leak up top? Gravity. So we see a lot of moisture issues because of that. We see a lot of moisture issues because people are not using their fans properly. So we can do an infrared scan of the unit. And basically what that does is it uses a thermal camera to look at very large areas to see if there's any temperature differences. So if it's a completely orange wall and we see a purple spot that says something is colder, we can use our moisture meter to say, is this just a cold spot or is this actually a leak that's coming from a bathroom upstairs or whatever it may be? The other things that we are able to provide, and we have a lot of concerns, especially within condos because they're enclosed and people, you're sharing kind of a space with other people. People do have concerns about mold, respiratory issues for their families, or if they have new children. Indoor air quality can also be a concern, so we can have a specialist come out and take a look at that. As well for older condos, asbestos. So there are things that use asbestos, things like popcorn ceiling, plaster in walls. This is important if your client is buying an older unit and they're wanting to do some sort of a renovation. If it's within that age range, they want to make sure that they get that test because if they start doing work, then that asbestos is released into the air. Okay, so we also, if you guys work, well, I don't know if you work on the commercial side at all, but we do have a commercial inspection division that's called CDW Engineering, and that's our sister company. So if you need help with things like technical audits, reserve fund studies, this is the company that you can reach out to, and we can help you with any sort of needs in that respect. And like I talked about before, we do have 15 home inspectors on staff, 5 commercial, actually it's 16 now, 5 commercial inspectors. We are open Monday to, actually 7 days a week, Monday to Friday, 8 to 8, 10 to 4 on Saturday, Sunday. And you can also book inspections 24 hours. If you have a deal going through, we can get you in same day, which is really important for a lot of you, I know. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions about anything you saw today or any specific condo questions? Yes. Okay. Mhm. Yeah.
There may be more potential for a problem. Maintenance is
Yeah.
even more important. And you know, when I know I'm on the top floor of a building and I know there's a flat roof above, it doesn't matter. I'm still looking very closely for moisture issues, but we keep that in mind, right? You're looking for any evidence of leakage issues. Sometimes when there's, don't tell anybody this, but sometimes when there's a heating system on the roof, I'll climb on the roof. You're not supposed to, but we just have to do what we have to do, right? I treat the inspection as if I'm buying it myself. I'm going to look at it. Very important to think of it that way, right?
It really depends on the building as well. So how well the
Yeah.
building is maintained and what the property manager is.
It's
Okay.
a wood frame.
It's a brick outside, but
It's probably a wood frame brick veneer. How many stories is the building?
just four.
Yeah, it's a low rise. It's probably a wood frame building. It's just the way houses are built these days. So even more important to maintain moisture, and maybe there was problems with the exterior envelope. It's hard to say. I'd have to see the
So it doesn't matter like if it's slanted or flat roof with more problems, maybe because of the snow and rain.
It just has to be watertight, right?
Yeah.
A sloped shingle roof on a regular house is a water shedding roof. All the shingle has to do is get the water to the next shingle, to the next shingle, to the next shingle. Like David mentioned, a flat roof is not really flat, but it's a very low slope, and any openings in that roof, so it needs to be very well maintained. Okay, that's why they force them to do regular servicing of every system in a condo. It's part of the maintenance fees.
So that's a really important point, though. There are, for newer buildings, it's important to understand that we see issues in brand new buildings often.
Yes.
Because people that are, contractors can forget to do things or do things incorrectly. Sometimes that happens. And so it's important to understand that just because something is a brand new building doesn't mean that it's not going to have issues. We can walk your client through and we can check things out using the thermal camera, run the systems and make sure that everything is right. Because we have seen issues in brand new buildings as well. It's not a matter of, well, it's brand new, so there won't be problems for a few years. It's important to remember that. Does anyone else have a question?
Or anything about previous experiences with other condos?
I'm sorry? Yes, the heating system?
Pipe Banco unit. It's not necessarily as important to understand the difference between those, but to understand the difference between a heat pump versus a fan coil unit type system versus a forced air gas system. So the fine details of that aren't very important, but understanding that when you're running your heat pump, you're paying for all the electricity to do all of that heating and cooling versus a central system that's controlled by the building versus something that uses gas and it runs like a furnace. Just understanding those basic differences. And I mean, you start going on a few condo inspections, you start to understand and see these differences. And rather than I don't know if you guys do a lot of condo listings, but what percentage of those are listed as forced air gas? Probably a fairly high percentage. And to put it in perspective, let's say in the last 500 condo inspections I've done, I've seen 4 forced air gas systems. Okay, they're not very common in condos. So it's good to know that, right? Especially if it's a heat pump. That's the one that comes to mind because rather than spending between $50 and say $100 per month on electricity, you're maybe spending between $100 and $300 per month on electricity. So there's a difference there, right? Right. No worries.
Where's the pros and cons of the centralized water tank and the pump water tank inside the units?
Just for domestic hot water supply or for heating and cooling? You're just talking about the pros and cons of each system. Typically, the building usually has a central domestic hot water system. That's just the way most buildings run, unless it's a retrofitted building. That's just the way most condos are, unless it's maybe a little bit older and they'll have a combination heating system, which we didn't even touch on today. Let's just say there's a lot of different varieties. And when we go into a particular condo unit, we talk about the pros and cons of that particular system. Go into a condo and say, these are like the 20 different options, and this is the one you have compared to all these different options. We just tell them about their specific unit so they understand what they're potentially buying or selling. Okay?
So anyone else have any questions? Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us. If you guys have any questions, I have left my business card there. There's a $50 Got Junk gift card there. And there's some other information about our company, as well as mold and other things that might be of interest to you and your clients. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.